Fred Patrick, Director of the Pathways from Prison to Postsecondary Education Project, Vera Institute of Justice. The 1994 crime bill, one of the severe restrictions coming out of that was the banning of Pell Grants, federal Pell Grants for inmates in state and federal facilities. One of the downsides of that, of course, is it almost overnight eliminated many of the post-secondary education programs that were up and running. In fact, one study suggests that there were over 200 programs prior to the ban, and the year after there were only 94 college and prison programs. In New York State, for example, there were over 70 programs, and then by mid-year 2004, I believe it was, it had already gone down to just 8. So the impact is that many of the opportunities that were in place were no longer sustainable. Many of the colleges had relied primarily on public funding from the federal Pell Grants as a means to operate these programs. And so now you have a much smaller number of programs around the country, and most of them, of course, being privately funded with private foundations and private donors. The other thing I want to say about it is it was about the politics of the moment. They get tough on crime politics. The reality is only 0.1% of the total Pell Grant funding was going to individuals who were incarcerated. So we're talking about a very small percentage of that funding. And the reality is it was never an issue of this one versus that one, in the sense that Pell Grants are an entitlement, and so anyone who is income eligible would receive it. So inmates receiving Pell Grants was not denying those in the community from receiving it. Education is hugely important for people who've been incarcerated. It's really a pathway to successful reentry. I think it's a major opportunity to address the perceived and real talent and skills gap in the U.S. Recent data suggests that 65% of all job openings by 2020 will require some form of post-secondary education. And so we have individuals who are incarcerated, 700,000 coming home each year. For me, that's an opportunity to build that pipeline of individuals who can meet the business needs. On top of that, we know that post-secondary education is important in terms of public safety. There's a 43% lower reduction in the odds of an individual recidivating who's participated in prison and education programming as compared to those who don't. Similarly, employment. Individuals who participate in education in prison have a 13% greater chance of getting a job. And depending on the type of educational programming they were involved in, that better odds of getting employment might be as high as 28%. I think the other crucial point is that it's transformational. So it transforms lives. Individuals are able to come home and not only get jobs and better support themselves and their families, but they come home with what we expect education to do: critical thinking skills, moral reasoning, better writing skills, better interpersonal skills, the ability to deal with diversity and work in teams. We once in this country saw education as a public good because we understood the benefit that educating an individual provides to the greater whole. And again, these individuals who are incarcerated are part of that greater whole. They're coming home, they're part of our society, and we should embrace them in that regard. The other thing about education in prison is that it's very much a cost-effective and cost-efficient investment. The return on investment is huge. For every dollar invested in education in prisons, there's a $5 savings in terms of reduced criminal justice costs. So when we live in a time in which there's lots of pressure around having evidence-based practices that save dollars, that are cost-effective, that are impactful, you really can't find much of a much better strategy in that regard. So not only does it reduce recidivism, as we've talked about, not only does it increase employment odds, but importantly, it's doing it in a way that's very impactful. Again, for every dollar invested, $5 saved. And at a time in which we were talking about tight budgets and choice resource allocation, I think that's huge.